Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Marnie Watson, and I'm the Chief Partnership Officer for Acumen, and Acumen is part of the Sannam S4 Group. Before I introduce my colleagues, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the country, joining you from today. We recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters, and thank them for protecting the coastline and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to all First Nations who are present with us today. So let me introduce my colleagues. There are a number of people on the call who are not speaking today, so I'm actually going to start by introducing those who are speaking with us. So first of all, we're joined by Fiona, if you want to give us a wave, Fiona. So joined by Fiona Morris, who is the Department of Education Counsellor, Education and Research for Malaysia. Fiona will also be representing some of our Latin American insights as well today, given her background. We're also joined by Jennifer Bain. Jennifer Bain is a Department of Education Counsellor, Education and Research for Vietnam. We should also be joined, if not now, then momentarily by Han Xiaojiang is the Department of Education Counsellor, Education and Research for Indonesia. And then my own colleagues are part of Acumen. So we have Heike Manning. Heike is our Executive Director for Southeast Asia, who is here representing us for Vietnam, Malaysia and Indonesia. Professor Bhavna Kumar. Bhavna is our TNE Project Director for India. And Jamie Ash. Jamie is from EDCO LATAM. Jamie is the CEO and founder of EDCO LATAM. EDCO LATAM are a partner of Acumen, working with us on this project. So, Sonali, if you would like to share screen, and I will just talk through what we're going to discuss this afternoon. Now, just for your awareness, we're recording the session, just so everyone is aware of that. We will share the recording with you, and we will also share the slide deck with you. So please don't feel that you'll miss out on any of the information. We will be doing some questions and answers specifically for the Colombia, Brazil information directly after we present on that. Reason for that is it's very, very late in Colombia for Jamie, so we'd like to give him the chance to jump off the call if he wants to. For the rest of the countries, for the markets, for the opportunities we're discussing, we'll take questions right at the end of the session. So we've got about an hour and a half scheduled together for the session. So please feel free to type your questions in any time, but just note that we'll take them at the end. If we just pop to the next slide, Sonali, what you can see here once it comes up is the schedule. So we're going to start off, as I mentioned already, with beg your pardon, well, before we get to Colombia and Brazil, we'll start off with a project overview from Fiona, thank you. I'll give you a little bit more context of Acumen's role in the project, and then you can see there, I won't talk through it all, but you can see there we're working through each of the countries. And what we want to share is both a phase 1 update, because we've actually already been working on this project for over 12 months. And then I want to talk to you also, the team will talk to you about the phase 2 projects. If we move to the next slide, and I'll pass to you, Fiona.
Thanks very much, Marnie. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. It's great to see so many people interested in this particular TNE project. My name is Fiona Morris. As Marnie mentioned, I'm the Education and Research Counsellor based at the Australian High Commission here in Malaysia. Previously, I was the Education and Research Counsellor based in Mexico City with responsibility for Colombia too, so I can assist with any questions on that one as well. Today, I'm also representing Alison Dell, who is the Assistant Secretary for International Partnership Branch in our International Division here in the Department of Education. Just to give you a little bit of background on the project, for those of you who don't know much about the project. So the Australian Strategy for International Education 2021 to 2030, that was developed in collaboration with the sector and was released in late 2021. It has a key theme based on diversification of the sector and particularly capitalising on digital and offshore opportunities for international education providers, otherwise known as transnational education or TNE. Our Minister for Education, Jason Clare, has publicly expressed his appreciation for the international education sector, and he's particularly interested in how Australia can grow our online and offshore delivery. The Minister has made very clear his interest in working collaboratively with the sector to consider and address challenges and also to pursue opportunities for innovation and growth. And that's what this particular project is about. Partners within our various regions have also demonstrated a lot of enthusiasm for transnational education as a way of accessing high-quality Australian education at a more affordable price point. The Australian international education sector has had a really strong history of being a leader in international education, and in order to remain competitive, we need to consider how we can maximise these opportunities. So under the $10 million International Education Innovation Fund, we allocated $1.5 million to supporting pilots of innovative transnational education delivery in the tertiary sector, targeting key regions with a demonstrated appetite for TNE. And we did apply the broadest possible definition of TNE for this particular project, and you'll see that as we go through each of the different countries. So in April 2022, we engaged Sannam S4 and the Acumen team as part of Sannam to identify innovative TNE pilot opportunities and to work with the sector to deliver those pilots. So the Department of Education's offshore network of counsellors, myself in Malaysia, my colleague Matt Johnston in India, Jen Bain in Vietnam, Barbara Kloppenhauer in Colombia. We've been working very closely with Sannam on the phase 1 pilots, and each of the speakers today will provide more detail on each of those phase 1 pilots in their countries, how they're unfolding and the future for those. And also our colleagues Han and Cassia in Indonesia and Brazil are looking forward to working on phase 2 of the project with Sannam and with the sector. And we'll outline today what phase 2 will look like. We know that the TNE space is complex and unique to each country, so that's why it's really exciting to work with the Acumen team and to work with the sector to share knowledge and expertise and to basically push the dial on innovative TNE delivery. Thanks again for joining us today and for the opportunity to speak, and I'm going to pass back to Marnie. Thanks, Marnie.
Thanks, Fiona, very much. And I'm going to just take a moment because I do realise we're a little bit confusing sometimes. So we interchangeably use the name Acumen and Sannam S4. So just for context, so Sannam S4 or Sannam is our group name of the organisation of the company, and Acumen is our very specific education division, and we have another division that does market entry, taxation, that sort of area called Seamless. So just bear with all of us as we interchangeably say to you Sannam or Acumen, it's one and the same. Sonali, on the next slide, if I may, what I wanted to talk about is our role in the project. So Sonali, if you skip through those bullet points for me. The first is to our role has been to start off by providing some very deep research and insights, data insights research into the selected regions that the Department of Education identified as the priorities. So we started 12 months ago with North Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Latin America. And the department was leveraging our research and insights division and our relationships with a wide range of universities, other tertiary vocational providers, and also governments in these relevant regions. We have partnered with selected providers. That's our role, is to identify education providers, match them, and essentially act as the project managers, the facilitators, the people who are on the ground in these locations, ensuring that the projects progress successfully. And as I've identified there in point 3, really work through those barriers and those time challenges that really happen, everyone I think well understands with transnational education. Our role is to take the education providers through to that meeting, understanding, getting an agreement together. We will be there in the background, analysing the pilots, making sure we're feeding back to the Department of Education, because this really is about that word pilot, really trying to understand the opportunities and the challenges that occur as we undertake these, as Fiona said, very broadly defined TNE projects. And that broad definition is something to really note, because as we talk about them, some of you may question, that's not really TNE. Well, it is, because we're trying to lead towards that offshore of education and understand what works and what doesn't in a very short window of time. So Dali, on the next slide, what we've done so far is, I mentioned we had 4 regions 8 countries were identified within the 4 regions. We then identified 3 opportunities for each of those 8 countries, or 8 markets, if you like. As we were identifying the pilots to undertake, we focused on these 8 criteria that you can see listed. And I just want to highlight there those 3. We have a very short window to provide some pilot insights back to the Department of Education. So we needed projects that have an ease of execution in a short time frame, but then also prove to have ease of execution for providers in the future. Point 2 relates exactly to what I've just said. We needed to be able to deliver a result in that pilot phase period. And then, as well as the other points, a key part of this was to look at innovative, different types of transnational education opportunities, which is why this very broad definition was applied. If we go to the next slide, please, Sonali. So to date, and this is what we're going to share with you today, we've done phase 1, and those phase 1 pilots were in those countries listed. So Colombia, India, Malaysia, Vietnam. And then we're now moving into phase 2, and we will talk to you again about what those phase 2 will look like, focused on Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam. Brazil will explain, but Brazil is a possible, and India is also a possible, and we'll talk more about that. Next slide, please, Sonali. Okay, in terms of timelines, we will revisit this slide at the end of the session, but just very briefly. So we're having a chat now to introduce phase 2, where there is an expression of interest form located at that link. We would like expressions of interest by October the 20th. These are no obligation EOIs. We will then work with those who submit an expression of interest to provide more understanding, to give more information, have one-on-one conversations as needed. And then we will select those who are going to participate. Now, the last highlighted point on this slide notes that depending on the amount of institutions who are interested, tertiary providers that are interested, it may become a competitive process, but it does depend how many show interest. As you can imagine, given the short time frame, our project goes through until June 2024. So what this means that we do need providers who are interested in working fast with us. And so we need to start immediate implementation sometime between November to February, sometime in that window of identification, implementation, and then actual delivery commencing in that very short window, which is why when you see the sort of projects, they are much faster type of transnational education opportunities. We'll then be, at the end of May, we'll be providing a project evaluation of the phase 2 initiatives. On the next slide, Sonali. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Jamie. So Jamie's coming to us from Colombia. He's going to talk about both Colombia phase 1, Colombia phase 2, and then he'll touch very briefly on Brazil. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Marnie. Good evening, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Ash, as Marnie mentioned. I'm the founding director of EDCO LATAM Consulting, and we partner with Sannam S4 Acumen in Latin America. So I'm going to run through a couple of slides. I won't, of course, cover everything that's on the slides. The deck will be sent out, but to give you an idea of the phase 1 status and also talk about the introduction to phase 2 in Colombia. Next slide, please. So to give you sort of updates and highlights of what's happened in phase 1, we had interest in the project from 8 Australian higher education institutions. After a dedicated webinar to explain more about the pilot and relating to COIL, we had 2 Australian institutions that submitted expressions of interest that went on to take part in the pilot. Simultaneously, which is interesting, we had over 20 Colombian higher education institutions that showed interest. Some of the top institutions in Colombia were interested, and one of those is taking place. And one of those is part of the project. And we had a separate webinar that mirrored the Australian session, diving into the pilot details, talking to the Colombian institutions, and 15 finally submitted expressions of interest. Next slide, please. So what happened after the webinars? We looked at the matching process to understand the needs of the Australian partners as well as the Colombian partners, and to identify which institutions would fit well in the COIL process. Macquarie University and la Universidad Tecnológica de Pereira took place in a COIL project in the theme of education, and La Trobe University and la Universidad del Rosario are also taking place in the COIL pilot in public health. Another key fundamental part of the project was to organize a tailored COIL workshop, which was run by SUNY COIL, which, as many of you know, are one of the largest comprehensive university systems in the United States and champion COIL around the world. We had a focused session of 3 weeks with joint learning curriculums on project design, collaborative brainstorming, and how the function of the COIL project would work. And that workshop finished on the 30th of June. The COIL projects officially started after the training in July and have concluded now in September. And the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, with keen interest in further collaborations between institutions for the future. Next slide, please. So it's a success story because the institutions, the pilot went very well. The feedback, as mentioned, has been overwhelmingly positive. We are in the process now of a full evaluation over the next couple of weeks, which will be fed back to the sector. And the great news is that the Australian institutions are exploring integration of COIL into broader market strategies, and the relationship is now fully developed between these institutions, with the goal of developing further collaboration in the future. And was one of the main sort of ideas behind the COIL pilot, to introduce Australian institutions and Colombian institutions on a deeper level. Next slide, please. So we've learned a lot about implementing COIL and TNE in Colombia, which again will be shared by the sector. What was very interesting is that the interest was quite uneven in the pilot, as you could see from prior slides. There were, whilst top Colombian universities were more interested, there were fewer Australian institutions interested, and I think that's driven by trying to understand how to incorporate COIL into a more comprehensive market strategy. But of course, we're here to ensure that if that pilot happens, conversations will take place about further market strategy with other incentives. And it's a great way of getting in and building relationships with Colombian institutions. It's very important to remember, as mentioned in the prior slides, that the institutions that are interested in COIL are some of the top ranked institutions in Latin America and Colombia, and would be partners well sought after by Australian institutions, and therefore running a COIL pilot with these institutions would be very valuable for the future. And I think one of the most important things at this moment in time is to understand that our two Australian partners, after experimenting with COIL, have yielded valuable insights, and will be looking to further implement this in wider markets in Latin America. Next slide, please. So how did the Department of Education and Acumen EDCO collaborate in market? So it's really important to mention Barbara, who, of course, with her influence and network, played an integral part in supporting the Australian partners, speaking to faculty members and stakeholders within the institution to champion the COIL pilot and ensure that everybody was on board. Simultaneously, myself and my team have extensive network and influence in Latin America, specifically Colombia, where I'm based. We have access to a very wide network of institutions, and we worked with CCYK, which is a network of institutions in Colombia, to actively engage with key stakeholders and introduce them to the COIL pilot. It's also, of course, important to highlight the responsibility of the work that we did in market to coordinate the 3-week training program in partnership with SUNY COIL. And this initiative ensured that pilots were very well prepared to embark on the COIL journey and its overall success. Next slide, please. So phase 2, next slide. I'll briefly run over these slides in the interest of time. So I think it's just very important to remember, first of all, that TNE is still in its very early stages in Colombia in many respects. So it's important to understand that a COIL pilot such as this is a great entry point and a fantastic way to build relationships with key Colombian institutions. There's an opportunity for growth. We know that Colombian enrollments, mainly in Australia, driven by ELICOS and VET. So for an institution to begin working with Colombian partners in COIL will open the doors to, of course, undergraduate, postgraduate programs and doctorate studies, and form those relationships with faculties. There's also potential for Australian institutions, partners, to expand their presence in the higher education market, and COIL is a great way to do so. It's very important to remember that there is collaboration in Colombia aligned with the broader strategy from the Department of Education, and Austrade and DFAT are fully supportive, and therefore you have all the people behind you should that be needed. And these combined efforts ensure the success of the pilot. Next slide, please. So the COIL market expansion is very attractive for universities. There is an example of this working extremely well in Mexico, and this replication will obviously be carried out in Colombia. It's a strategic approach for market development. Many institutions in Latin America and Colombia are looking for ways of collaboration to then further develop partnerships. And the COIL project, the success of this COIL project, and I'm sure many in the future, will really support institutions that want to gain a foothold in Colombia and work with some of the top ranked institutions. It's important to remember that the opportunity in Mexico, the call for COIL project scholarships was launched last year. This is now closed, but it shows that there's an increased and growing interest in COIL partnerships in Latin America. Next slide, please. So very quickly and briefly, we are going to have a webinar in October with more detail about COIL, and we can also offer one-to-one counselling with any institutions that are interested to explain a little bit more about the details of COIL. But for the purpose of this webinar, and in great summary, COIL stands for Collaborative Online International Learning. It brings two groups of students together from different disciplines or the same disciplines, to work towards a common goal or project. It fosters networks among faculties, and it provides opportunities for international exchange. It's a fantastic way virtually to bring two groups of very different cultures together, two faculties together, two institutions together, and ensure they're exchanging ideas, working towards a common goal. And then next slide, please. So why is COIL recommended to phase 2? Well, first thing is that it supports Australian partners with brand building and awareness, as mentioned previously. And it's a great way to build relationships more easily with Colombian institutions and increase longer-term higher education mobility. We must remember also that COIL is a very cost-effective way for Australian institutions to enter the Colombian market, and with little risk, as we've seen from the pilot that is taking place. And there's a real desire for international experience amongst Colombian students. They want to trial having that experience with Australian students and Australian institutions before, of course, taking the step to go and study there. So it provides a real opportunity to learn, share, and collaborate, allowing two cultures to get to know each other, and really puts Australia on the map in Colombia. It also connects, of course, Australian and Colombian faculty members, which is the main goal to lead to possibility of joint research and articulation agreements in the future. Next slide, please. So the rationale again is, of course, continuing on the success of Pilot 1, fostering those relationships between Colombian and Australian institutions and paving the way for future development. As I mentioned, COIL is easier to set up with sufficient timelines and offers a straightforward approach to innovative TNE at minimal cost. And there's an opportunity to diversify Australian enrollments by tapping into Colombia's higher education system beyond EDUCAUSE and VET. And there is a growing interest from universities and governments for COIL, and it's easily approved at faculty level. And that's very important when wanting to quickly establish relationships between two institutions, and its rapid implementation yields quick results with limited financial investment. Next slide, please. So how will the Department of Education and Acumen EDCO support? Well, we will offer the matchmaking process, ongoing development with Colombian institutions. We, of course, understand that we can find the right partner, and looking at the expressions of interest, make sure that these match correctly. We have the networks to support this. And of course, the tailored training program, 3 weeks delivered by Sunny COIL, is fundamental, ensuring that the COIL pilot works. And the feedback from both partners on the Colombia and Australia side was very positive regarding the workshop. Next slide, please. So thank you. That concludes the Colombia part. going on to Brazil, we're in the process of discussing the potential of a pilot in Brazil. We don't have any detail on this at the moment. If you want to just go on to the next slide, please. But if anybody is interested in engaging with Brazil, we would ask that an expression of interest is submitted, and then we can give more information once we have this available about what the pilot might look like in Brazil. For this moment in time, it's an ongoing process to decide which pilot we run with and if that's going to happen. But you're invited to submit a no obligation expression of interest, and of course, we will follow up with more information as it becomes available. So thank you, Marnie. If anybody has any questions, of course, I'm happy to take those.
Thanks, Jamie. Yes, just as I said earlier, we'll do most of the questions at the end, but specifically for Colombia, Brazil, now is the time to jump in with questions. We can also take them later, but Jamie might not be with us, but Fiona will be. So feel free. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask at this point, or we'll keep moving? There's a Q&A.
Marnie, apologies. I must mention that Barbara will be at the AIEC in October. So if anybody wanted to personally connect with Barbara, that would be a great opportunity to do so. And I guess, Fiona, if you could potentially pass on Barbara's email, then she would love to talk to you in more detail. And a great person to talk about COIL, very enthusiastic. So thank you.
Wonderful. All right, so there's no questions coming in, and we can take more later anyway. So Jamie, thank you very, very much. If you want to drop off, feel free to do so.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.
We're now going to move into our Indonesia discussions, and Ali, if you'd just like to move to the next slide. I mentioned before that we're joined by Han, who is the Department of Education Counselor, Education and Research for Indonesia. So both Han and Heike are going to share the discussion, but starting off with you, Han, thank you.
Thanks, Marnie, and good afternoon, everyone on the line. Yes, Indonesia. It's great that Indonesia is part of this project for phase 2. Let's flick to the next slide to showcase a little bit about Indonesia. I think the best word to describe Indonesia is potential, because of the scale and the opportunities that are available in this country. Indonesia is a country of 270 million people, of which half are under the age of 30. They've got about 50 million people that are considered middle class. So the potential is massive. Indonesia is also the half of ASEAN's GDP. So we're talking about a massive country in the region with massive influence. And that's why Australian education providers should really think about Indonesia as a transnational education opportunity. The good thing about Indonesia is that they are a developing economy in which their number one priority for the current government, the current administration, is around human capital development. They've got a very, very ambitious goal of upskilling 57 million people by 2030. And that's largely in digital economy, green economy, and blue economy. So there is a significant need for skills. But the unfortunate thing for Indonesia is that the domestic education and training system doesn't quite have the capability or the capacity to meet these skill needs. And that's great for Australia in that we're very well placed to support Indonesia's human capital and economic development. Well, why? Well, we have a very strong brand in the country, and also the fact the geographic proximity. You know, people think about Australia as a place that they want to study, but they also recognise the quality of our institutions and our training providers. And thus, this is a great opportunity for us. There's a range of bilateral mechanisms that enable the two-way exchange in terms of international education, but broadly of that bilateral relationship as well. And right now is a great time because the current administration is very welcoming towards international education. So I think it's very important that we capitalise on the current window of welcoming attitude and the environment. I'll let Heike to talk about the specifics of what we're thinking about for phase 2. So we'll go to the next slide. Now I'll pass it to you, Heike. Thank you.
Thanks, Han, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you today, and I have the wonderful pleasure today of speaking to you about Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia as well. I'll also be at AIEC in October as well. So obviously, as discussions develop, I'm very happy to meet and talk further in Adelaide next month. So in terms of the rationale for inclusion of Indonesia in phase 2, I think Hans laid it out pretty clearly. Could be summed up as really Indonesia's too big and too important to be ignored. And I think the other element to this is that there's a huge amount of activity already going on in Indonesia in the education and training space, and this gives us an opportunity through this pilot to try something new and different, which maybe hasn't been looked at as much as some of the other things that are going on. So when we're looking at the kind of pilot that we'll introduce for Indonesia, we are looking at a focus on executive education again, and with a focus on areas of Australian expertise that kind of match to Indonesian demand. So some of those themes that Han mentioned before, but looking at things like energy and energy transition, sustainability, digital transformation, for example. And really the key features of what we have in mind here are a focus on professionals, working professionals, which may include senior staff at some of the major state-owned enterprises in Indonesia. We're also assuming that it won't be self-paid by the participants, but that there will be funding, or that the cost of the programs will be funded by either business or government. And we're also mindful that in Indonesia itself, there are already a range of different executive education programs being offered in business and leadership in general, through both private and local providers, as well as some Australian providers. So we don't want to really focus on those. We prefer to focus on more niche areas. So one outcome potentially for this pilot as we develop it could be the validation of whether there is actually an accessible market for Australian education providers to provide solutions to the state-owned enterprise sector in Vietnam, in Indonesia, excuse me, which we all know is massive. Next slide, please. So why are we focused on executive education short courses for the Indonesia pilot? I think maybe the first thing is that there is a little bit of coherence in terms of what we've been looking at elsewhere with this project in Southeast Asia. So as I'll mention and talk about a bit later on, in Vietnam, where we've been focused on executive education, in Malaysia, where we've been looking at micro-credentials, we felt it would be really useful to have a more comparative exercise with pilots run in sort of a similar sort of area across those three key markets. The recent Southeast Asia economic strategy that was launched in Indonesia a couple of weeks ago highlights the opportunities for short courses and micro-credentials in the region. And I think also we're very mindful that, as I mentioned before, that when we think about Indonesia, Australia has huge history, and Australian education has huge history in Indonesia, and so that has tended to focus primarily on students, traditionally through student mobility, but more recently in terms of transnational education, with the announcement of the branch campuses and other activities. So this really represents, we think, an opportunity to extend what I would call the life cycle of Australia's education offerings by looking at how we can offer solutions to working professionals rather than students. And I think the other thing that's a little bit different here maybe is really looking at how we can build and test whether we can build partnerships with corporates and government to deliver some of those solutions. Next, please. So in terms of next steps, we will continue to market scoping and further validation of the idea. But as we move into the ELI process, and Marnie and the team will speak a little bit about that later, actually what we're quite interested to do is we're quite interested to work with interested Australian providers on slightly more of a co-design model. So within a sort of a broad framework of looking at executive education and delivering solutions in partnership to working professionals, what is it that you as your institution are really interested to test in Vietnam? So we'd really be interested to move into a sort of a co-design model, rather than just sort of simply presenting you with this is what it's going to be, and express your interest. In terms of the support that you can expect from us, of course, Han and his team in Jakarta are on hand to support, provide the diplomatic support, expert advice, being able to open doors in a way that others can't. And we will have a dedicated project manager on the ground in Indonesia to provide day-to-day support throughout the design and the execution of the pilot, to support that outreach to local partners, and advice on commercial terms as well. So that's at this stage what we have in mind for Indonesia. As I said earlier, I think we're really keen to talk further and through the EOI process get a sense of, for Australian providers who are interested in the market, what would you like to see within this sort of framework, and work with you to stand up a really interesting pilot for the Indonesian market. That's everything I have to say, I think, if I've got my slides right, on Indonesia. And if I'm correct, then I'll hand the talking stick to my colleague Bhavna, who will take us through the India project. Thank you. Next, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Heike, and good morning from India. Good afternoon to everybody, and good evening to the people from the Colombia team. The phase 1 status follows. Please have the next slide, Sonali. Well, India is a turbocharged market, as my DE colleague, Minister Councillor Matt, has rightly been saying. The most dynamic changes in the higher education sector, post especially the national education policy, have been announced, and hence we saw a good bit of activity and had 11 Indian and 8 Australian higher education institutions who submitted their expression of interest for the phase 1 of this project. Out of that, there are 2 significant bilateral partnerships that are currently under development. The first one is with Charles Sturt University, and the second one with La Trobe University from the Australian side. And the partners from the Indian side are the JP Institute of Information Technology and SPSU, Sir Sadampat Singhania University. What has been interesting is that while the initial talks were concentrated initially on all the existing models which are very popular in India, which is articulation, and there were talks about dual degree and things, but considering that innovation was the key of this particular pilot, the discussions have moved how it can be more of high quality employability linked, and hence the choice of the 2 Indian universities. Both the JP Institute of Information Technology and SPSU are backed by 2 very big industrial groups in India, and that was the effort in which we wanted to bring together the industry component as well. These industries which are having a big play in hospitals. JP has a hospital, they have JK Cement, they have a lot of presence in the higher education sector, which traditionally started more of as a CSR and a contribution towards education activity. But considering the growth in the higher education market has moved to bring more innovative, more international in approach. Internationalization at home is the fervor in Indian higher education sector today. And while we have seen a lot of movement in terms of international partnerships, it has also been observed that it has been restricted to a few hubs in terms of states and cities, and also to a very few dynamically oriented either the public universities or the private universities. Our endeavor through this project was to bring in partners who could, who may be having that zeal and passion for internationalization, but may not really know how to be able to bring in that innovative edge through the TNE mode. The models which are being discussed are AI in healthcare for the JP and CSU team, and that is based on the backing of the JP hospitals, which is already a very good healthcare institution. There is a deep engagement which is presently ongoing, and it goes beyond what has been anticipated because the entire model is being co-developed from the very beginning. Cybersecurity has been chosen as the area for La Trobe University and SPSU, where it is already an area where there is a niche which we have seen in the Indian market, and LTU has been a prominent player. But to be able to bring that to the western side of the country and the state of Udaipur, where Singhania University is again backed by a very important group of the JK group, it brings a different fervor to the whole equation. So Nali, next slide, please. The entire model was very well supported by the local expertise and understanding that the Department of Education Minister Councillors and the team provided. They not only have been very actively supporting all Australian universities, but we also had visits from the Australian ministers, and there was a lot of dynamic discussions around how innovation could be brought in, which only accentuated when GIFT City, which was the first city to bring in the proper branch campus TNE model to India, saw Deakin and Wollongong, again, both Australian universities entering the market. Hence, the roles that Acumen team and the Department of Education team provide while bringing institutions together is in a very complementary way, while trying to explain how the bilateral relations have can be strengthened further, what is the background and the context in which both the institutions from both the countries can actually collaborate, and their presence during all the sessions and in the finalization of model of the partnership has also been instrumental. Next slide, please. The present status of the project as it stands is that we have had the letter of intent and the memorandum of understanding which have been signed. The movement has brought in a shift towards talking about credit transfers to micro-credentials, and the micro-credentials are being discussed between faculty working groups in the areas of healthcare and cybersecurity. The talks that are happening are around the course design and how can it be built into a business case, which is where currently the discussions are ongoing, because the major concentration, of course, is that the entire concept is, if it's unviable in terms of financial viability from either side of the institution, or from the preference of the students to take up this in their home country instead of going out to a different country, then the whole concept of innovative partnership has a case. That is the present challenge. We are also trying to see how the industry, which has to be an important part of the innovation that has been decided for the Indian market, is actually something which is relevant in terms of employability across the world. And that's a challenge with higher education institutions are facing, how to make the students more and more employable, more so in areas like cybersecurity and AI, which have been chosen in this area. While India has been traditionally at the forefront in IT services and stuff, the dynamic nature of AI, and we've all seen that with the kind of OpenAI and ChatGPT which has come in, and cybersecurity itself, accounts being hacked and people being coming, the dynamic nature makes it mandatory that any kind of a course delivery which is happening, if it is bringing together the expertise of the foreign institution from Australia and the Indian market know-how and the faculty strength from India, it has to be supported in terms of the practical insights, in terms of actual understanding of implementation of the course in a dynamically changing, volatile, and VUCA market that we all know about, and that has to be integrated. So the talks between the healthcare sector for the AI partnership and for the government and other corporate sector for the cybersecurity market mandate that the phase one continue in terms of its thrust, and we don't lose the momentum which has already been established in terms of building the relationships between the faculty from both sides. There has been a deep engagement, there have been regular discussions, industry discussions have also started happening, but the financial viability of the project, along with the fact that there is always the concern about low bandwidth of operation and so many other operational workloads that come into the way, which lead to more bandwidth. Hence, we are focusing on continuation this phase one to bring it to the stage that we all anticipate, innovation in work integrated learning. That said, next slide, please. For the phase two, we would like to continue with the depth and detailed learning from the present two projects. Hence, we are not announcing a full-fledged phase 2 and focusing on the delivery of these present partnerships. But because India is the turbocharged and dynamic market, and there is that 10 to 11 million of Indian population, which Acumen research has identified, which is just striving to find a way to support foreign education beyond the 1 million which are already going abroad for their studies, we feel that if there is any Australian tertiary education providers who have some kind of an idea in mind, who have some kind of an innovative TNE concept which they may have tested in other market, and they would like it to be extended to the Indian market, where we have the market know-how, we are supported by the Department of Education team. And if you feel that you can get that concept gathered by the stage 2 completion, which is phase 2 completion of June 2024, then we are open to receiving an EOI, and we will be assessing that EOI and possibly considering it for the India initiative. But we will talk more about that when we take Q&A. That's all from my side, and I will hand it back to my colleague Heike for the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Bhavna. Sonali, can we go to the next slide, please? And the next one. Thank you. Thank you. So to those of you who don't know me or don't know about where I'm based, I'm actually coming to you from Ho Chi Minh City today, where I've been based in Vietnam for close to 11 years now. And so what I'm going to do is I'll just take you through a status update of phase 1, and then we'll move into what we're thinking about for phase 2. So many of you will know that for phase 1, which we've been running for around 6 months now, it's focused on executive education with a theme of digital skills for leaders, digital transformation. And one of the key reasons for that, in terms of that focus on digital skills, was really looking to align with changing workforce needs, and also what the government, industry, and even professionals themselves have identified as a key skills gap. We also focused on executive education because, again, just as with Indonesia, Australian providers are incredibly active here in Vietnam, doing a huge amount, both in terms of student recruitment and student mobility, as well as TNE. And so we felt that this was an opportunity to target a different market segment from students and focus on working professionals. What we've also noticed through the research we've done is that there's lots of executive education being offered in Vietnam, but there's nothing really being done at the premium level in terms of, international standard executive education being offered at scale. And so part of the project is to validate and to understand why and whether there is indeed a market at this stage for that premium service. So Murdoch were confirmed through the EOI process as the Australian partner, and we've been working with them very closely in recent months. And we took them through, and they met a whole range of different providers, both private training providers and university partners. And we are now at the point where the service agreement, which has all the details of the commercial arrangements and everything else, the division of roles, etc., is due to be signed imminently with the local university partner. And we have 2 pilot programs or courses in digital skills for leaders that will be run one in Ho Chi Minh City and one in Hanoi in November. We're learning a lot already, and obviously this will come out as part of this project in terms of sharing the insights to the Australian education sector on what we've learned, but really interesting insights into pricing, the role of language and language support, the importance of good course design. All of these things have come out as we've been working through this pilot. And, for Murdoch, in terms of hopefully the benefits that they will have seen from participating in this project, is, really that opportunity to build some broader relationships and to also explore relationships with parties that they may not have originally thought to collaborate with, particularly some of the private training providers. but also an opportunity to stress test their existing executive education programs and to see how easy or difficult it is to tailor it for a different market. So in terms of what we're hoping to achieve through this pilot is some sort of initial validation whether there is a market for Australian executive education in Vietnam. And, you know, quite honestly, the answer may be no. We don't know yet. And it will give us some signposts. And assuming that there is, you know, some prospect of a decent market here for Australian providers, it will give us a much better understanding of the market dynamic in terms of sales channels, the types of partners to work with, as well as the best fit delivery model for this particular market. And just to say that for the first phase pilot, the mode of delivery will be actually face-to-face. Next, please. So in terms of phase 2, we're looking at continuation of phase 1 in respect of some key features. Firstly, continuing to focus on working professionals as the core target market segment. And the second thing is the product in terms of a continued focus on executive education. For the subject area or theme, digital skills, I think, remains in the frame, but we are quite open and interested to look at how we might expand that out to some other areas as well. So what we're looking at for phase 2 in terms of our approach is actually building in a strategic partner into the partnership. And we are looking at the prospect of working with financial services industry partner, most likely a large bank, and working in collaboration with them and a local training provider to provide education and training, executive education training solutions to their corporate banking clients. So in terms of what's innovative and what we think will be innovative in this project is obviously a chance to test a different market channel and hopefully a pretty interesting different partnership with a large corporate partner. And also the opportunity to broaden out beyond digital skills and look at a range of different solutions for the strategic partner and their clients. But just as with Indonesia, we are looking in phase 2 at you know, the option of more of a co-design approach to phase 2. So really working with interested providers and to get your ideas on what you think might work or what you would like to test in the market as well within this sort of general framework and go from there. Next, please. So in terms of the benefits of participating in phase 2, I mean, obviously, you know, right now, Vietnam is very much in the frame. And I think, you know, when we look at the Vietnam-Australia relationship, it's really riding on a wave of momentum, you know, with the 50th anniversary and all the activities that have been going on here. And education and skills is sort of a key element of that. So I think there's a real momentum element here to, you know, to latch onto. But also, I think one of the other things that participating providers will get from being involved in this project is some really interesting practical insights in the mechanics of operating in an emerging market segment and operating in a different way. So moving away from perhaps more traditional retail recruitment or traditional TNE partnerships and looking at a different way of engaging here in Vietnam. So in terms of how we will support, just as we've done with Murdoch over the last few months for the first phase, really close and ongoing advice, almost on a daily basis, really helping to identify, filter and engage with the local partners and supporting with negotiating commercial terms and getting service agreements where they're required in place as well. And the team, the fabulous team at the embassy in Hanoi, Jen and her team are always also on hand to provide diplomatic support as well, and that sort of rich market knowledge that they have. And just before I hand back to myself to talk about Malaysia, Jen, did you want to add any comments?
Thank you, Heike. I don't have much more to say other than your fabulous presentation. Just it's sort of three things I'd like to emphasise. One is that it is a very busy year here in Vietnam, and that has given us quite a bit of momentum around the education and skills relationship. So I do encourage people to sort of jump on board that. Secondly, I'd just like to thank Sannam and Heike for all the work that they've done in phase 1, but also particularly Murdoch University for going along the journey. We are testing something, and Murdoch has done that in the spirit with which we designed it, and I thank you for that if you're online. The third thing is, and the thing I'm most excited about phase 2, is looking at that co-design element. Heike's right. We really want you to tell us what you think you could do within the boundaries that we're creating here. So as you go away and think about that, please come with the spirit of co-design when you present your expressions of interest to us. Finally, I also will be at AIEC, so please reach out if you'd like to have a discussion at some point during the week. Back to you, Heike, from Malaysia.
Thanks, Jen. And I promise this is the last session I'll talk to you about. And I also acknowledge that there's a lot of information coming to everyone today. We're going to talk just actually quite briefly about Malaysia, because Malaysia, we've been working on the phase 1 pilot. But Malaysia will not be in the second phase that we move into. So we just really wanted to provide you an update on how things are tracking with that pilot. Next, please. So we have been focused in the phase 1 pilot on micro-credentials. And again, we had narrowed in on a theme that we thought made a lot of sense, which was cybersecurity. And the reason why we did this was, again, looking at it from a demand perspective. We can see in Malaysia, just as in many other countries, there's huge demand at all different levels for better cybersecurity awareness and training as well. So not just for the technicians and the people and the IT folk who are really protecting and supporting our systems, but also for leaders as well, and for managers, just much better understanding of cyber and cybersecurity. In Malaysia, of course, the Malaysian government has moved to recognise micro-credentials by setting up a micro-credentials framework through MQA, which really kind of gives a strong signal as to how they see and how they want to see that upskilling continued for their professionals. And alongside that, there's also been some government funding through HRDF fund, or the HRD fund, I should say, to support upskilling as well. So we've been working in this project with 2 providers, TAFE New South Wales and as an RTO, and also with La Trobe University. And the reason we were keen to have these 2 types of providers involved in this pilot was because we wanted to test different market channels as well. So as you can see, with TAFE New South Wales, we have been looking to partner them with private training providers, and with La Trobe University, we've been looking to partner them with private universities. We're still working through the design and the final partner selection, but it's narrowed down to 1 in the case of La Trobe, just sort of working through the commercial details, and for TAFE New South Wales, just finalising their partnership. And the goal is to run the pilot programs in the first quarter of 2024. And I think that's kind of interesting as well, because we originally thought that we would be able to get these pilots up and running a little bit quicker. But it's just another signal that, TNE in all its forms can take quite a while to stand up and to get moving. We're already learning quite a lot, and one of the things that sort of is really striking is the different pricing that exists for different market segments. So when we've worked and looked at working with private universities, we do see a lower pricing structure than, for example, private training providers. We're learning more about access to government funding for micro-credentials and for industry training. And it's also interesting to see, and will be interesting to see through this pilot, the degree of appetite for online delivery of these micro-credentials, and that is the proposed delivery mode for both TAFE New South Wales and for La Trobe. In contrast, for example, to the executive education program in Vietnam, which will be face-to-face. So in summary, what we are hoping to achieve through this pilot is really, just as with Vietnam, is an initial validation of whether there is a market for Australian micro-credentials in Malaysia, or I should say dual award credentials, at the price point that Australian providers will expect in order for this to be commercially viable, and really sort of get some better understanding of those core design and delivery elements in terms of what's the best way to deliver it, who's the best person to partner with, what do service agreements look like as well. So really trying to get some sort of practical insights that we can share with the sector for the future and to explore future opportunities in Malaysia. So with that, I will hand back to Marnie, I believe, and we'll go into the next phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Heike. Thank you very much. So just to wrap up, and as we're wrapping up, please have a think about any questions you have, because that's the moment that we're moving into. But to wrap up, to repeat how we started, reminder of what happens next. So core focus for the opportunities are on Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, possible opportunities for Brazil and India. So if you've got an interest in any of those 5 markets, do please submit an expression of interest, a no obligation expression of interest, and just note that Brazil and India is a little bit looser in terms of what the actual opportunity might look like. We need those expressions of interest by the 20th of October, and they can be accessed through that online link, which we'll make sure everyone gets a copy of. And then we will arrange individual catch-ups, maybe some market-specific webinars, depending on how many people we have interested. And then we'll do that selection process, and people will be informed in early November is the plan, and then we'll move from there. On the next slide is just a repeat of the same kind of timeline. If you just want to move there, Sonali, for just a moment, so everyone can have a quick look, and then we can stop screen sharing. So you can see there. So essentially, November is when the selection takes place, and then we get moving with the priority of trying to get some pilot learnings in place by the end of May. Just to repeat what Fiona has said and Jamie mentioned about Barbara from Department of Education also being at AIEC, excuse me, the team from Acumen will also be at AIEC. So myself, Chris Bandy, Heike Manning, Adrian Mutton, who's our founder and CEO, there'll be a group of us there. So please feel free to reach out to us and have one-on-one discussions as needed. Sonali, we can come off screen share and take some questions. And Fiona, we might just go straight to, before I actually look at any of the questions that are there, might just go straight to you just to touch on the importance of reiterating that this is a tertiary education provider initiative, conscious that we're very university heavy in a lot of what we've talked about, but I'll just pass that to you, Fiona.
Thanks very much, Marnie. Yes, I think that's a very good point, is that this was open to vocational education and training providers, RTOs in Australia, as well as higher education. And certainly for Malaysia, we were very keen to see what opportunities there might be. So we were really pleased that TAFE New South Wales ended up being one of the providers who's working on a pilot in Malaysia. There was a specific question too about COIL and whether that might be available to vet providers. I think my answer to that is I don't see why not. COIL, I think in that particular phrasing, which was an American construct, the Collaborative Online International Learning, was developed by American universities for collaboration with their international partners. And I think it's proven to be a really good TNE opportunity for Colombia, and probably it will be for other countries in Latin America as well. But there's no reason it could not work for a vocational education and training provider if they had an appropriate vet partner in another country as well. So I certainly think that would be something that we could consider as a pilot for phase 2 for some of the other countries. Happy to have a further chat with anyone at any point, and I know that Barbara would be very pleased to speak with people at AIEC as well.
Yeah, and just to that point, Fiona, maybe just as I'm sort of talking for a moment, can you help me out with just popping Barbara's, there's a question in there, or maybe, yeah, there's a question in there about Barbara's last name. So Barbara Kompenhauer with a K, but I might get Fiona to write that in for me so I don't get the spelling incorrect, Fiona. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't think we have any more for the moment. So look, questions welcome. I think hopefully you know somebody of the team who's spoken today. We will definitely follow up with anyone who pops in that EOI. It's not a particularly onerous expression of interest. So, you know, we welcome anyone to ask questions, put it in through that method. I actually, just while I'm talking, want to take the opportunity to really Fiona, acknowledge Department of Education, the partnership that we've had over the last, whatever we're up to, 15-month period of working through these projects across each of the markets has been so much about the collaboration, the partnership as we've worked through these. So just a reminder to any of the education providers that are out there that are interested, the power of this opportunity is really coming through that Department of Education focus on this initiative, the importance of transnational education, as Fiona said at the beginning, to the government, combined with the fact that we're both on the ground. We've got Acumen tasked with making sure that this pushes through all of those challenges. We explain to you regulation, whatever it may be, across getting this done, together with the diplomatic force that comes with the Department of Education counsellors on the ground with us. So Fiona, just a big thank you to your team as well. I think, unless there's, oh, hang on, I think another question might have popped in. Okay, no, I think we're good. I think I will wrap us up there. Fiona, would you like to add anything before we close?
Just to say thank you very much to Acumen, the Sannam S4 team, the EDCO Latam team. We also think this has been a really, really valuable project, and it will continue to be valuable. As Heike mentioned, I think, you know, some of the time that it has taken to develop the pilots took a little bit longer, but I think that speaks to how complex it can be to introduce innovative TNE programs. And I think that having this project and the support from both our network and from the Acumen team working with Australian providers is a really unique opportunity for the sector. We'd really welcome your expressions of interest, and thank you for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely weekend, and I hope I see you at AIEC. Bye-bye.